Well, speaking of some of those South African A players who might get elevated to the senior side, the South African A fixture against the Saxons, coming back nicely in the second half, Rob, against the England Saxons, but them also going down. And I guess these games are used also, I guess, as an opportunity to sort of have a proper look at these guys knocking on the door. Anyone else from that side who you think deserves to be in the senior side?
Yeah, it was a very interesting game because it was, again, the South African A side looked very disjointed and error-ridden to their detriment in the first half. They conceded tries very much against the run of play when, they were dominating, they were on the attack, and then they'd concede a silly turnover or something, and England would counter-attack quite spiritedly and sort of score at the other end. And you still you went into half-time thinking, well, this South African A side, there's still something about it. You felt as if Johan Ackermann's influence was sort of there, and it just needed a little bit of sort of perfecting, if you like, for a team obviously mostly sort of foreign to each other. And then in the second half, we saw some really good rugby from the South Africans. I thought Sikambuzo Noche had a really, really good game in open play. I wrote about it at the weekend, and he reminded me so much of a young Bob Skinstad for that sort of free running ability in open play. A little bit of learning to do in the tighter phases, perhaps, and also a bit of sort of tweaking about which role actually is the best one for him, because he's a 6, 7, and an 8, and somewhere along the line you feel as if maybe they need to sort of find somewhere sort of a bit more specialist for him to sort of to settle in. But look, he's a guy who's put his hand up. I thought Nick Groom did quite a good job at scrum half. Often a reasonably maligned player. Some people. You're not happy with the fact that he got into the senior Springbok squad, and then of course was given the opportunity to play one of the guys who wasn't clearly not going to be in the match day 23 for Newlands, which ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise. But he then got an opportunity, and I thought did pretty well. I thought he did his basic functions quite decently. So there was some hope in that A side, especially if that second half can now translate into a decent 80 minutes in the follow-up game in George. But having said that, the England Saxons team was also very decent, and it's a bit worrying that it was almost an England C side, because England took, I think, a 30-strong squad to Australia for the full Test series. So it's not as though it was even strictly a sort of England A side. It was a little bit less than that. So if they go on to win the series 2-0, where does that leave our depth? It certainly is a bit of a concern.
On the other hand, Garen, encouraging, I guess, to see the Northern Hemisphere teams kind of coming to the party finally. Often on these sort of winter tours, they get absolutely smashed. So the sort of balance in world rugby is kind of coming right, obviously bearing in mind the result for England against Australia. Wales, very competitive against All Blacks, but then, as All Blacks always do, coming back in the second half. What do you make of the other international results?
Yeah, very interesting. Like you said, the gap is certainly closed, I think, between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. Australia aren't sort of at their best. South Africa certainly aren't at their best and haven't been so for a while now. And New Zealand are building sort of for the next Rugby World Cup, having lost so many experienced players. So, the Northern Hemisphere, if you look at really who's coaching them at the moment, you've got Eddie Jones, one of the best in the world, Joe Smith up there, New Zealander, Warren Gatland. They're all top New Zealanders. They seem to have this influence on their team. It's filtering through. They know the conditions down in Australasia, and it's certainly helping their teams be competitive, which is great to see. It's been a while now since we've had the sort of big three and then the rest, but the gap is certainly closing. Wales, they led at half time for 60 minutes. I thought there was perhaps an upset on the cards. The All Blacks, credit to them, they're very much an 80-minute team, and they're probably the fittest team in the world. They ran away with it slightly at the end. The scoreline may even have flattered them. There was a bizarre Wayne Barnes forward pass call that denied them a further 7 points. And then for England over Australia, massive series for them. I believe that's the first time they're playing a 3-match series in Australia. 1-0 up. David Pocock out for the series for Australia. It's going to be difficult for Australia to bounce back and win the series now. It's great again for England to be a stronger team. I think everyone's crying out for them. Eddie Jones, you can really see, he's unbeaten as a England coach. Grand Slam already in the books. The strides that they've made since the Rugby World Cup, where they at home crashed out early, is remarkable. And they are my outside dark horses, I think, for Japan in 2019. I think they're going to be just at their peak come 3 years down the line now. So great to see rugby. Again, a note that I did pick up was that all three of those Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere matches were reffed by Northern Hemisphere referees. Next weekend, from a South African point at least, we're going to an Australian ref, and then we've got a New Zealand ref in the final match. I think they'll ref slightly differently. I think the Southern Hemisphere teams will enjoy that sort of Southern Hemisphere, the familiarity of Southern Hemisphere referees. I expect South Africa obviously to be a lot better. I expect the All Blacks to beat Wales again, and then it's really just, can England clinch the series against the Wallabies? So it should be fantastic to see, but good that the gap's closed for sure.